But what if it was all a lie? Ademola's voice echoed in Oluchi's ears as she stood frozen, her phone slipping from her hand. She could hear the raw pain in his voice, but it was his words that shook her to her core. "What are you talking about, Ademola?" she finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. "Olivia." Ademola's voice cracked on the other end of the line. "She set me up. She drugged me, Oluchi." The world seemed to tilt for Oluchi. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of everything she had been avoiding. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her throat dry. "I woke up and she was beside me," he said, his voice breaking with shame. "I know I didn't. I wouldn't have done this willingly. Feel like a fool, Oluchi. I feel like I've betrayed you all over again." For a moment, Oluchi didn't know whether to feel anger, pity, or despair. "You have no idea how much pain you've caused me, Ademola," she said finally. "But this is worse. Oluchi, I need you," he pleaded. "Please come back to me. Let's fix this together." But before she could respond, a loud, piercing knock on her door startled her. Oluchi slowly approached the door, her heart pounding in her chest. When she opened it, she was met with an unexpected sight. "Anti-ego," she said, her voice laced with confusion. "What are you doing here?" Anti-ego didn't answer immediately. Her face was grave, and her eyes flicked nervously down the hallway. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "What's going on?" Uchi asked, shutting the door behind her. Anti-ego sat down heavily on the couch, looking older and more worn than Oluchi had ever seen her. "It's about Jennifer," she began. Oluchi's stomach churned at the mention of her name. "She called me from prison," Anti-ego continued. "She's been manipulating everyone. Olivia, Ademola, even you. And now she's planning something else, something dangerous." Oluchi's hands balled into fists. "What does she want from me? She's already ruined my life." "She's not done yet," Anti-ego said grimly. "She told me to get both you and Olivia to meet her. She said it was urgent." Meanwhile, at Ademola's apartment, Olivia was on edge. Jennifer had called her again, this time with an ultimatum. "Ademola is slipping through your fingers," Jennifer sneered over the phone. "You need to tighten your grip before Oluchi gets back into the picture." "I've done everything you've asked," Olivia snapped. "I drugged him. I stayed by his side. What more do you want from me?" "I want results," Jennifer roared. "You think sitting pretty in his house will make him yours? He's not yours, Olivia. He's never been yours. And if you fail me, I'll make sure you regret it." Olivia hung up the phone, her hands shaking. She couldn't let Jennifer's threats get to her. She needed a plan, something to keep Ademola firmly under her control. That's when her eyes landed on Ademola's laptop. A wicked idea began to form in her mind. Anti-ego had arranged for Oluchi and Olivia to meet at a secluded restaurant under the pretense of discussing a reconciliation. What neither woman knew was that Jennifer had orchestrated the entire meeting from behind bars. Oluchi arrived first, her nerves frayed. She didn't want to see Olivia, but Anti-ego's insistence had convinced her to come. When Olivia walked in, the tension in the room was palpable. "You," Oluchi said, her voice cold. "Don't start," Olivia shot back, her tone equally icy. "I didn't ask to be here either." Anti-ego raised her hands to silence them. "Enough. Both of you need to listen to me. This isn't about your petty squabbles. This is bigger than both of you." "What are you talking about?" Oluchi demanded. "Jennifer," Anti-ego said, her voice low. "She's planning something, and if we don't work together, it's going to destroy all of us." Before Anti-ego could elaborate, Oluchi's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. Her hands shook as she opened her email and found a video attachment. With trembling fingers she pressed play. The video showed Olivia in Ademola's apartment, pouring something into his drink. The timestamp was from the night Ademola had mentioned. "You Oluchi looked up at Olivia, her eyes blazing with fury. You drugged him. Olivia's face turned pale. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. Oluchi screamed, standing up. You've been lying to everyone, manipulating everyone. Enough! Auntie Ego yelled, slamming her hand on the table. This isn't helping. But the tension was too thick to cut. Before the argument could escalate further, all three women's phones buzzed simultaneously. It was a video call request, from Jennifer. Against their better judgment, they answered. Jennifer's face appeared on the screen, her smile smug and sinister. Ladies, she said, her voice dripping with malice. I see my little plan worked. It's so good to see you all together. What do you want? Auntie Ego demanded. What I've always wanted, Jennifer replied. Chaos. The screen suddenly went black, replaced by a countdown timer. What is this? Olivia asked, panic creeping into her voice. Jennifer's voice echoed through the phone. Let's just say, time's running out for all of you. As the timer ticked down, Oluchi, Olivia, and Auntie Ego stared at each other, their fear palpable. What do we do? Oluchi whispered, her voice shaking. We have to figure out her next move, Auntie Ego said. And we have to do it fast. The countdown continued, each second driving them closer to an unknown fate. Timer on the screen ticked mercilessly, each second a hammer to their already fragile nerves. Oluchi's palms were clammy as she clutched her phone, her mind spinning. The restaurant suddenly felt like it was closing in on them, the air growing heavier with each passing moment. What do you think she means by this? Olivia's voice quivered as she pointed to the countdown. Don't act like you're the victim here, Oluchi snapped, glaring at her. You drugged him. Whatever Jennifer has planned, it probably started with you. I said it's not what it looks like. Olivia shot back, though her voice lacked conviction. Enough of this nonsense. Auntie Ego's voice cut through their argument like a blade. This timer isn't waiting for your squabbles to end. We need to figure out what Jennifer's endgame is. Oluchi took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. She's in prison, Auntie Ego. How much damage can she really do from behind bars? Auntie Ego's lips pressed into a thin line. You'd be surprised. Jennifer isn't just dangerous. She's resourceful. She has people on the outside working for her. We're all in danger, whether we want to admit it or not. Then why involve me? Olivia asked, her voice trembling. I've done what she asked. Why is she still targeting me? Because Jennifer doesn't stop, Auntie Ego said grimly. She feeds off control and chaos. And right now she has both. The timer on their phones hit the 1-minute mark, and a new message flashed across the screen. Choose wisely. Only one can survive this game. What the hell does that mean? Oluchi exclaimed, her heart racing. Auntie Ego's face darkened. It means she's playing with us. She wants us to turn on each other. We're not doing that, Oluchi said firmly. We're not giving her what she wants. Suddenly, a waiter approached their table, carrying a small, unmarked envelope. This is for you, he said, placing it on the table before walking away. Auntie Ego snatched it up and tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "Turn on each other, or I'll turn on you. Jennifer." The three women sat in stunned silence, the weight of Jennifer's words pressing down on them. We need to leave, Oluchi said finally, standing up. Sitting here is exactly what she wants. But what if leaving triggers something worse? Olivia countered, her fear evident. Auntie Ego sighed heavily. We can't let fear paralyze us. Let's regroup somewhere safe and figure this out. They agreed to leave, but as they exited the restaurant, Oluchi's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Ikeen. Have you thought about my proposal? Oluchi's heart sank. She had promised herself she'd give Ikeen an answer today, but with everything happening, it felt impossible to think clearly. Back at her apartment, Oluchi sat on her couch, staring at Ikin's message. His proposal had been straightforward: leave the chaos behind and build a new life with him. He had been her rock, the calm in her storm, but her heart was still tethered to Ademola in ways she didn't fully understand. She decided to call Ikin. I need more time, she said softly. You've had time, Oluchi, Ikin replied, his voice firm but kind. I love you, but I can't keep waiting while you're caught between the past and the future. Choose. Before Oluchi could respond, her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Ademola standing there, his face a mix of desperation and regret. Oluchi, please, he began, his voice cracking. I know I've hurt you, but I can't lose you. Not to Ikin, not to anyone. Oluchi felt her chest tighten. Ademola, this isn't just about us anymore. Jennifer is pulling the strings, and I don't know if I can trust you. You don't have to trust me, Ademola said, stepping closer. Just trust that I love you. We can fight this together. Before Oluchi could respond, her phone buzzed again. It was another video message, this time showing Ikin talking to an unknown woman in a dimly lit room. The woman's face was hidden, but her voice was unmistakable. It was Jennifer. So you'll help me with her, won't you, Ikin? Jennifer's voice was cold and calculated. I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe, Ikin replied. Oluchi's head spun. Had Ikin been working with Jennifer this whole time? Oluchi's mind raced as she tried to process the video. What is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Ademola moved closer, his expression darkening as he watched the video. Ikin. What's he doing with Jennifer? I don't know, Oluchi said, her voice trembling. I thought he was different. Ademola placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out. But you need to know who you can trust. Oluchi pulled away, her emotions in turmoil. And how do I know I can trust you, Ademola? After everything you've done. Ademola looked pained but didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed her his call history. I've been trying to reach out to people who might know Jennifer's next move. I'm not just standing by, Oluchi. I'm fighting for us. Before Oluchi could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a live video call. Against her better judgment, she answered. Jennifer's face filled the screen, her smile smug and menacing. Enjoying my little game. What do you want, Jennifer? Oluchi demanded, her voice shaking with anger. I want you to see the truth, Jennifer replied. Everyone around you is playing their own game. And when the dust settles, you'll see who really has your back. The call ended abruptly, leaving Oluchi and Ademola staring at each other in stunned silence. Who do we go to now? Oluchi whispered, her voice filled with despair. Ademola took her hand, his grip firm, and we confront Jennifer, and this ends today, Ademola said, his voice resolute as he stood in the living room. Oluchi, arms folded tightly across her chest, gave a hesitant nod. The weight of their decision hung in the air as they made their way to the prison. Oluchi's mind raced. Confronting Jennifer felt like walking into the lion's den, but she couldn't back down, not after everything. At the prison, they were led through cold, sterile corridors to a small visiting room. Jennifer sat on the other side of the glass, her expression a mixture of smugness and curiosity. Ah, my favorite couple, she said, leaning back in her chair. What brings you to my humble abode? Ademola clenched his fists. This game ends now, Jennifer. We know you've been pulling the strings, and we won't let you destroy our lives anymore. Jennifer chuckled, her laughter echoing in the room. Destroy your lives. Ademola, I'm in prison. What power do you think I have from here? Oluchi leaned forward, her voice cold. We know about Olivia, about the drugs, about everything. You've been manipulating her. Everyone. For a moment, Jennifer's smile faltered. Then she leaned closer to the glass, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think you've figured it all out, don't you? But you're only scratching the surface. There are things in motion you can't even begin to understand. Ademola slammed his hand on the table. Enough with the riddles. What do you want? Jennifer's eyes gleamed with malice. What I've always wanted, to watch everything you love crumble. And trust me, Ademila, it's already happening. Her cryptic words sent a chill through Oluchi. As they left the prison, a sense of dread lingered. What was Jennifer planning next? The call came as they were driving back. Ademila's phone buzzed, and the voice on the other end was urgent. Mr. Ademila, this is Dr. Hassan from Lakeside Hospital. Olivia has been in an accident. You need to come immediately. Oluchi shot him a worried glance, but Ademila was already turning the car around. At the hospital, they found Olivia unconscious, her face pale and bandaged. The doctor approached them with a grave expression. She's stable now, but there's something else you need to know. Ademila frowned. What is it, doctor? The doctor hesitated before saying, Olivia is pregnant. The words hit Oluchi like a punch to the gut. Her heart sank as she turned to look at Ademila. His face was a mixture of shock and confusion. Pregnant, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Oluchi didn't wait to hear more. Tears streaming down her face, she bolted out of the hospital. Ademila called after her, but she didn't stop. Outside, she dialed Ikine's number with trembling hands. Come and get me, she choked out. Ikine arrived within minutes, concern etched on his face. He guided her into his car, his hand gently on her back. It's okay, Oluchi. I'm here. Back at Ikine's place, Oluchi collapsed onto the couch, her sobs shaking her entire body. Ikine sat beside her, his arm around her shoulder. I can't believe this, she whispered. I can't believe he's having a child with her. Ikine sighed. Oluchi, you deserve better than this. Let me take care of you. Stay here as long as you need. The next morning, Ikine brought her breakfast in bed, refusing to let her wallow in despair. He even went to her house to grab her laptop and a few changes of clothes, ensuring she could work without stress. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Olivia stirred awake. Ademila was at her bedside, his mind racing. How are you feeling? He asked stiffly. Olivia managed a weak smile. Better. Now that you're here. Ademila's jaw tightened. Is it true? Are you really pregnant? Yes, Olivia said softly. It's yours, Ademila. He sank into the chair, his head in his hands. Olivia watched him, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Maybe this is a sign, she said. A chance for us to start over. Ademila shot up, his eyes blazing. You can't tie me down with this pregnancy, Olivia. I know your manipulations, and I'm not even sure this child is mine. Her smile vanished as tears welled up in her eyes. You have to take responsibility, she sobbed. Ademila shook his head and stormed out of the room, dialing Oluchi's number. When Ikine answered instead, his tone was icy. Leave her alone, Ademila. You've done enough damage. Let me talk to her, Ademila demanded. She doesn't want to talk to you, Ikine said firmly. Be a man and move on. Focus on Olivia and your child. As Ademila drove aimlessly, his phone buzzed. It was Jennifer. Her mocking voice filled the car. Congratulations, Daddy-to-be. A little bird told me the good news. Go to hell, Jennifer. Ademila snapped. You've done your worst, but I'll prove that baby isn't mine. Jennifer's laughter echoed through the line. Oh, Ademila, you're so predictable. This is only the beginning. He hung up, his mind a whirlwind of anger and confusion. Desperate for guidance, he went to Auntie Ego's house. She listened in stunned silence as he explained the situation. Finally she sighed and said, Ademila, to think I was trying to convince Oluchi to give you another chance. But now, this changes everything. Her words were a dagger to his heart. Back at Ikine's place, Oluchi was beginning to feel a semblance of peace. But late that night, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. When she answered, the voice on the other end froze her blood. "Hello, Oluchi," Jennifer purred. "Miss me?" The line went dead. Oluchi's hand trembled as she gripped the phone tightly. The sound of Jennifer's voice replayed in her head, her threats weaving through her mind like venom. She let out a piercing scream, startling Ikin, who rushed from the kitchen, his face etched with concern. "What happened?" "Oluchi, talk to me," Ikin asked, kneeling beside her. Still shaking, she managed to whisper. "Jennifer called. She knows everything. She's threatening me again." Ikin's face darkened. "We have to report this to the authorities. She can't keep tormenting you from prison." But Oluchi shook her head, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "No, Jennifer has nothing to lose. The most dangerous person in the world is one with nothing left. Reporting her will only make things worse." Ikin hesitated, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then what do we do? You can't let her keep controlling your life." Oluchi looked away, her voice a whisper. "I don't know." Meanwhile, Ademola sat in his apartment, his mind in turmoil. Olivia's sudden revelation had turned his life upside down. He was still grappling with the idea of her pregnancy when he heard a sharp knock at the door. Opening it, he was greeted by Olivia, standing there with her luggage. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with irritation. Olivia pushed past him, her chin held high. "Baby and I are moving in. I need someone to take care of me, take me to antenatal appointments, satisfy my cravings. After all, I'm carrying your child." Ademola stared at her, dumbfounded. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. His mind raced. He didn't believe for a second that the child was his. How could it be, considering the circumstances? But Olivia was relentless. After a long silence, he lifted his head and smiled, masking his true feelings. "All right, you can stay. But the guest room is yours. I value my privacy." Olivia frowned, clearly displeased. "Guest room? But I'm—" Ademola raised a hand, cutting her off. "Guest room. Or you go back to your house." Reluctantly, Olivia agreed, a small smirk forming on her lips. To her, this was a temporary setback. She was determined to make him fall in love with her for real. But Ademola had other plans. "Play it cool," he thought to himself. "If she's lying, I'll catch her in her own web." Back at Ikin's place, Oluchi decided to call her mother. She hadn't spent Christmas with her family, and guilt gnawed at her. "Oluchi, my daughter, are you okay?" her mother asked, her voice filled with concern. "Yes, Mama. I'm fine," Oluchi lied. "You've been quiet lately. Remember, my child, love is never easy. But don't let pain make you give up on it," her mother said softly. After the call ended, Oluchi sat in silence, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Was she giving up too soon? Or was she simply protecting herself from more heartbreak? Over the next week, Oluchi buried herself in work, shutting everyone out, including Ikin. She barely spoke and refused to answer her phone. Ikin respected her need for space but worried about her isolation. One evening, he came home with a plane ticket in hand. "You need a break, Oluchi," he said firmly. "I've booked a ticket for you to the Bahamas. You'll come back refreshed." Oluchi wanted to argue, but Ikin wouldn't hear it. He took her shopping, bought her clothes, and even accompanied her to the salon. But as they entered a boutique, they bumped into Olivia and Ademola. Oluchi's heart skipped a beat, but she walked past them without a word, her face expressionless. Olivia smirked as she leaned closer to Ademola, whispering loud enough for Oluchi to hear. "Darling, let's hurry. My feet are swollen from carrying our baby." Oluchi clenched her fists but kept walking. The day of Oluchi's departure arrived. Ikin drove her to the airport and waited until she boarded. "Take care of yourself, Oluchi," he said as he hugged her goodbye. Back at his apartment, Ademola was devastated when he learned about Oluchi's trip. He drove to Ikin's place, desperate for answers, but Ikin was firm. "She's gone, Ademola. Maybe it's time you let her go," Ikin said coldly. Ademila's shoulders slumped. She didn't even believe me, he muttered. Tears streamed down his face as he got into his car. Unable to handle the pain, Ademila drove to a bar, determined to drown his sorrows. Meanwhile in prison, Jennifer was restless. She felt Olivia wasn't moving fast enough with her plan. You need to make sure Ademila marries you, she barked during their call. Olivia sighed. I'm already living with him. Give me time. But Jennifer wasn't satisfied. Time is a luxury we don't have, Olivia. Do whatever it takes. Unbeknownst to both women, someone was watching them closely. A prison guard who had overheard their conversations. He quietly dialed a number, his voice low. You won't believe what I've just discovered. Late at night, as Oluchi settled into her hotel in the Bahamas, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Reluctantly, she answered. A voice she didn't recognize spoke. Miss Oluchi, you don't know me, but I have information about Jennifer that might change everything. Meet me tomorrow. Alone. The line went dead before she could respond. Ademila, back at his apartment, was jolted awake by a sudden noise. He walked to the living room to find Olivia standing there, holding his phone. What are you doing? He demanded. Olivia smiled sweetly. Just checking the time. But something in her eyes told him she was lying. As he reached for his phone, she grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Ademila, she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. You'll never leave me. Not as long as I carry your child. Ademila pulled away, his heart pounding. Something about her felt dangerous. You can never leave me, Olivia whispered fiercely, her hands trembling as she clutched Ademila's arm. Her eyes burned with a desperation that sent a shiver down Ademila's spine. He yanked his arm away, his patience thinning by the second. Olivia, we've been over this, he said, his tone low but firm. You can stay in the guest room until we figure this out, but I need you to understand. I don't love you. I never did. Olivia's laughter was sharp and hollow. Never loved me. Then how did I end up carrying your child? She placed a protective hand over her growing belly. Ademila closed his eyes briefly, summoning calm. You know what happened that night. I was unconscious. Whatever happened between us, I didn't consent to it. Olivia leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Do you think anyone would believe you? I'm carrying your baby, Ademila. That's all that matters. You can't leave me because if you do. She let the sentence hang ominously, a cruel smile curling her lips. Ademila stepped back, his mind racing. For now he would play her game. He needed to gather evidence. Solid proof that the baby wasn't his. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. You win. But remember, you're in my house. You'll follow my rules. Olivia smirked, a flicker of victory in her eyes. Of course, darling. But as Ademila walked away, his thoughts were elsewhere. This isn't over, Olivia. Not by a long shot. Meanwhile, at Ikine's apartment, he sat alone in his dimly lit living room, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table. He stared blankly at the wall, his thoughts consumed by Oluchi. He loved her, there was no denying that. But he also knew she loved Ademila. And as much as it tore at his heart, Ikine respected Oluchi's feelings. Maybe it's time to let her go, he murmured to himself. But just as the words left his mouth, his phone buzzed. It was Oluchi. Ikine, her voice was soft but resolute. I'm coming back to Nigeria. Ikine straightened, his heart leaping. Are you sure? You've barely had time to rest. I've had enough rest, she replied. Besides, the Bahamas isn't far enough to escape everything. Ikine sighed. All right, let me know your flight details. I'll be there to pick you up. As he hung up, Ikine couldn't help but wonder what would happen once Oluchi was back. Could he stand by and watch her choose Ademila again? Or would this time be different? Back at Ademila's house, Olivia had fully embraced her role as the expectant mother. She demanded his attention constantly, from midnight cravings to back massages. "Ademela," she called from the kitchen. He entered reluctantly, finding her struggling to reach a plate. "What now?" he asked, barely masking his irritation. "I can't reach it," she said, pouting. "And you know I can't stretch too much in my condition." He grabbed the plate, placing it on the counter with more force than necessary. "Here. Anything else?" She smiled sweetly. "Actually, yes. Can you make me some fried rice? I'm craving it." Ademela stared at her, disbelief etched on his face. "At midnight?" Olivia shrugged. "Pregnancy cravings. You wouldn't understand." As he grudgingly prepared the meal, he couldn't shake the memory of her phone call earlier that day. He'd overheard her arguing with someone, a man, and though she tried to dismiss it as family issues, he knew better. "She's hiding something," he thought, "and I'm going to find out what it is." In the Bahamas, Oluchi received another call from the anonymous number. "You need to come back," the voice urged. "Your stay there isn't safe." "Who is this?" Oluchi demanded, her frustration growing. "That's not important," the caller replied. "Just trust me. Jennifer's reach extends further than you think." Oluchi hesitated. Could Jennifer really get to her all the way here? The thought sent a chill down her spine. But then she shook her head. "No. I won't let her control my life anymore." Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. Later that evening she called Ikeen. "I'm coming back," she told him. Ikeen was at the airport, pacing nervously as he waited for Oluchi. When she finally appeared, his heart skipped a beat. "You're back," he said, his relief evident. "Only for a short while," she replied, offering a small smile. "I just need to sort things out." Ikeen drove her to her house, ensuring everything was in order before he left. But as he walked away, he couldn't help but feel that something was about to change. Something big. Days later, Oluchi agreed to meet Ademela. "I've missed you," he said the moment he saw her. "Ademela, we need to talk," she said, her tone serious. They sat across from each other, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging in the air. "I love you," Ademela said, his voice breaking. "And I'll do whatever it takes to prove it." "What about Olivia?" Oluchi asked. "She's lying," he insisted. "I've already scheduled a DNA test. Once it's proven the baby isn't mine, will you give us a chance?" Oluchi hesitated. What if the baby is yours?" Ademela reached for her hand. "Then we'll face it together." Back at Ademela's house, Olivia received another call from the mysterious man. "You think you can give what's mine to someone else?" he growled. "Leave me alone," she hissed, her voice trembling. But as she hung up, she realized Ademela was standing in the doorway, watching her. "Who was that?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm. "Family issues," she lied, forcing a smile. But Ademela wasn't fooled. Her secrets are unraveling, he thought. And I'll be ready when they do. In prison, Jennifer seethed. Her plans were unraveling, and the guard she trusted had betrayed her. "You think I'll stop?" she spat. "You don't know me at all." The guard shook his head. "Jealousy will destroy you, Jennifer." "Then let it," she screamed. "As long as Oluchi suffers, I don't care what happens to me." But deep down, a sliver of doubt began to creep into her mind. What if she really had gone too far this time? As Olivia paced the living room that evening, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before answering. "What now?" she snapped. "I'm closer than you think," the man on the line replied. Suddenly, the lights flickered and Olivia froze. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. But the room was empty, or so it seemed. Olivia sat motionless on the chair, her mind racing as she held the phone tightly in her trembling hand. The voice on the other end was chilling, sending waves of fear down her spine. "I'm closer than you think," the man had said. The call had ended abruptly, but the words lingered in the room like a thick fog. Olivia could feel her pulse racing in her ears, and her heart hammered in her chest. She glanced around the empty room, her eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing. No one was there. Yet, her intuition told her otherwise. Who was that? She thought, her mind spinning. And what does he know about me? She hadn't told anyone, not even Jennifer or Ademila, about the secret she carried. It was a dark and dangerous secret, something she thought she had buried deep enough that no one could unearth it. But now, it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Her breath caught in her throat as she imagined the man coming for her. What if he had already been watching her? What if he knew everything? The room felt suffocating, and Olivia could no longer sit still. She paced the room, her thoughts tumbling over each other like a chaotic storm. No. I can't let this destroy me, she whispered to herself, trying to steady her nerves. I have to keep control. I have to find out who this is and stop him before it's too late. Her mind darted back to Ademila and the baby. The DNA test was still looming over her like a dark cloud. She had never wanted to do it, never wanted to put her relationship with Ademila at risk, but the secret she carried made it impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, across town, Ikeen was standing in front of an eatery, deep in thought. He had called Oluchi earlier, offering to take her out for lunch, but she had declined. She had told him she wanted to stay at home, but she didn't mind if he brought her something. He walked inside and ordered the food, trying not to feel the sting of disappointment. He had hoped for a chance to speak with her, to tell her how he truly felt. But as usual, Oluchi had closed herself off. When he arrived at her house with the meal, he noticed she looked a bit off. There were bags under her eyes, and her face seemed a little paler than usual. He couldn't help but notice that she had lost weight. Oluchi, he said softly, setting the meal on the dining table. You don't look well. Have you been eating properly? She smiled weakly. Just a little tired. They sat down to eat, but there was an uncomfortable silence between them. Ikeen couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had been there for Oluchi for so long, and he cared for her deeply, but he didn't know how to break through her emotional walls. After a few moments, he finally spoke, his voice filled with sincerity. Oluchi, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Her fork paused in midair, and she stared at him, her eyes filled with hesitation. She placed the fork down slowly and sighed. I know you do, Ikeen, she said quietly. But right now, I can't think about a relationship. I have so much going on in my life, and I don't think I'm ready for that. Ikeen's heart sank. He had hoped this would be the moment when everything would change, when Oluchi would finally admit she felt the same way. But instead he was met with uncertainty. I understand, he said after a long silence. I just wanted you to know how I feel. They finished their lunch in silence, both lost in their thoughts. Oluchi's mind wandered back to Ademila. She knew deep down she still had feelings for him, even though she couldn't explain why. He had never treated her the way Ikeen did, with kindness and patience, but her heart was still tied to Ademila in some way. Back at Ademila's house, the tension in the air was thick. Olivia was pacing the living room, her nerves on edge. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she had with Ademila earlier. He had told her he wanted a DNA test, and the thought of it terrified her. As she stared out the window, lost in thought, she heard the sound of the front door opening. Ademila stepped inside, his arms full of baby clothes. He dropped them on the couch and made his way toward her. I want to talk to you, he said, his voice serious. Olivia's stomach twisted in knots. What does he want to talk about? She sat down slowly, her heart racing. What is it? Ademila sat beside her and took a deep breath. Olivia, I need to know the truth. I'm asking for a DNA test. I have to know if this baby is mine. Olivia's face flushed with anger. Are you serious? This baby is yours, Ademila. There's no doubt about it. Why are you even asking me to do this? Because I have to know for sure, he replied, his voice firm but gentle. I can't take any chances. Olivia's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she nodded. Fine. If that's what you want, we'll do the test. As the tension hung heavy in the air, Ademila made a call to a doctor to arrange the test. Olivia stood up, feeling a cold wave of uncertainty wash over her. What if the test came back negative? What if everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden was exposed? At the prison, Jennifer received the news about the DNA test and immediately called Olivia. She was anxious, knowing that if the baby wasn't Ademila's, everything would fall apart. Olivia, Jennifer said, her voice low and tense. I need to know, is the baby Ademila's? Olivia hesitated. Yes, the baby is his. Jennifer didn't sound convinced. Are you sure? Because if the test says otherwise, you know what will happen. I'm sure, Olivia replied, though uncertainty lingered in her voice. Meanwhile, Oluchi lay on her bed, restless. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She loved Ademila, but she also cared for Ikeen. Her feelings for both men confused her, and the thought of what would happen if the baby turned out to be Ademila's weighed heavily on her. Just then her phone rang. It was Ademila. I miss you, he said. I wish you were here with me. Oluchi's heart fluttered, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. She didn't know what to say anymore. Before she could speak, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Ademila was standing there. Without a word, he stepped inside and kissed her passionately. At first she tried to resist, but then something inside her snapped. She kissed him back, giving in to the moment. As they lay in bed together afterward, Ademila pulled her close. I've waited so long for this, he whispered. I can't imagine my life without you. But Oluchi pulled away slightly. I'm not saying we're together now, Ademila. This was just... We got carried away. Ademila looked at her in disbelief. Really? After everything we've shared, you still think we're not together? Oluchi smiled faintly. I don't know, Ademila. I'm confused. Before they could say more, there was another interruption. Olivia called Ademila in the middle of the night, her voice frantic and desperate. Ademila, where are you? You left me. I'm in pain, please come back. I need you. Ademila's heart raced as he jumped out of bed. He turned to Oluchi, his expression a mix of worry and guilt. I have to go. Olivia needs me. Oluchi's eyes filled with concern. You have to go to her. She's pregnant. You can't leave her alone. With one last look at Oluchi, Ademila rushed out the door. His mind was in turmoil, torn between his love for Oluchi and his responsibility toward Olivia. When Ademila arrived, she was sitting on the couch, clutching her stomach in pain. Ademila, you left me alone, and now I feel like I'm dying, Olivia cried, her voice full of desperation.